She had always felt like an outsider, even in a room full of people. The constant moving from state to state as a child had taught her how to adapt, how to read a room, and how to become whomever she needed to be in order to survive. Her name was Sarah, and she had spent her entire life feeling the weight of an unremarkable existence. Born in a small town in Ohio, she had dreamed of something bigger, something more meaningful than the gray cubicle walls of her current data entry job. Her father had served in the Army, and she grew up listening to his stories, carefully edited, family-friendly versions of his time in service. Those stories planted a seed in her, a deep respect for the uniform and the people who wore it. But Sarah was a woman in her late 30s now, with a mortgage and a cat and a routine that was slowly suffocating her. The fantasy began innocently enough. She started visiting online forums for veterans, not to lie, but to listen. She learned the lingo, the acronyms, the dark humor that only those who had served seemed to understand. She learned about the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the sense of purpose that she craved so deeply in her own life. It was in one of these forums that she first read about the trident. Someone had posted a high-resolution image of the pin, explaining the symbolism of the eagle, the flintlock pistol, and the trident of Neptune. She was mesmerized. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a story, a promise, a badge of honor that represented the absolute pinnacle of human endurance and sacrifice. She started buying patches and pins online. At first, it was just for her own collection, and something she kept in a box under her bed. But the pull was too strong. She started wearing a seal ball cap to the grocery store, then a t-shirt with a faded Trident logo to the gym. The looks she got, a mix of respect and curiosity, were intoxicating. For the first time in her life, people saw her. They saw someone tough, someone important. The lies grew from there. When a guy at the gym commented on her shirt, she didn't correct him. She just smiled and said, "It was a long time ago." That was the first crack in the dam. Soon, she had crafted an entire persona. She had been a logistics specialist with the teams, she said, stationed in Coronado. She couldn't talk about the details, of course, because of the classification. The secrecy made her more interesting, more mysterious. The lie became her armor, protecting her from the crushing weight of her own perceived mediocrity. She wasn't just Sarah from data entry anymore. She was Sarah, the former SEAL. She had finally found a tribe, even if it was one she had built entirely out of fiction. The annual Veterans Day parade in her town was a big deal. It was the one day of the year when the quiet suburb exploded with red, white, and blue bunting, and the main street was lined with families waving tiny flags. For the past 3 years, Sarah had watched from the sidewalk, clapping politely. But this year was different. This year, she had been invited to walk. It happened through a chain of lies that had spiraled out of her control. She had become a regular at a local dive bar called the VFW Post, a place she technically shouldn't have been in, but no one ever checked her ID or her DD-214. She bought rounds for the guys, listened to their stories, and shared her own fabricated ones. They accepted her. They called her Sarah Bear because of her fierce loyalty to the group. When the planning committee for the parade needed marshals, one of her new friends, an old Marine named Sergeant Mack, had vouched for her. "Got a Navy SEAL right here, fellas," he had said, slapping her on the back. "She'll keep you animals in line." The day of the parade was crisp and cold. Sarah stood in the assembly area wearing her carefully curated kit. It was a delicate balance. She wore a simple leather vest adorned with a small gold trident pin and an American flag patch. She didn't wear a uniform, which was against regulations, but she looked the part of a rugged off-duty operator. She felt a surge of pride as she was positioned near the front of the march, just behind the high school band and in front of the antique cars. As they stepped off, the crowd cheered. Sarah walked tall, her shoulders back, her eyes scanning the crowd with what she hoped looked like a veteran's 1,000-yard stare. She nodded at the children, offered a curt, respectful nod to the old vets sitting in chairs on the sidewalk. It was the most alive she had ever felt. The attention, the respect. It washed over her like a drug. She belonged. She was a hero, but attention is a double-edged sword. Standing in the crowd, holding the hand of his young son, was a man named David. David was quiet, unassuming, wearing a plain gray hoodie. To the casual observer, he was just another dad. But his eyes weren't watching the floats. They were locked on the woman in the leather vest. He watched the way she carried herself, the way she acknowledged the crowd. He noticed the small gold pin on her chest, and something felt deeply, profoundly wrong. He looked down at his son, then back at Sarah. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened. He knew that pin. He knew what it cost. And he knew, with a certainty that came from years of hard-won experience, that the woman marching down the street had never paid that price. The parade ended, and the participants filtered into the town hall for the annual reception. There was coffee, donuts, and the warm buzz of civic gratitude. Sarah was in her element. A holding court with a small group of volunteers who were hanging on her every vague word about operational tempo and deployment cycles. She was just launching into a carefully vague story about a training accident in the desert when she felt a presence behind her. She turned. It was the man in the gray hoodie. Up close, she could see the hard lines on his face, the close-cropped hair, and the eyes, pale blue and utterly unreadable. He wasn't looking at her face, he was looking at her chest, at the trident. "That's a nice pin," he said. His voice was quiet, calm, but it cut through the chatter around them like a knife. Sarah felt a flicker of panic, but forced a smile. "Thanks. Service souvenir." He nodded slowly. "Where'd you get it?" "Gift from a teammate," she said, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. He passed a few years back. I wear it to remember him." The man's eyes finally met hers. "That's a hell of a thing to remember someone by." He paused. "I earned mine in 2006. Bud/S Class 262. The name of the training class hit her like a physical blow. Basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. The 65-week crucible. She knew from her research that less than a quarter of the candidates who started even made it to graduation. This wasn't just a veteran. This was the real thing. "Oh, wow," she stammered. That's amazing. Thank you for your service." He ignored the platitude. He was still studying her, his gaze dissecting her posture, her hands, the way she shifted her weight. "What class were you?" The question hung in the air. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She hadn't prepared for this. She knew the history, the gear, the lore, but she hadn't memorized a fake class number. "I, 255, she offered, her voice squeaking slightly. The man, David, just looked at her. He didn't blink. "Logistics, right? That's what Max said. Support." "That's right," she said, relief flooding through her. "A way out. I was support. Never went through the full pipeline, just attached." David took a half-step closer. The small talk around them seemed to fade into a dull roar. "Support personnel don't wear the trident," he said, his voice still maddeningly quiet. "They wear the NSW support insignia, an anchor with a trident behind it. Different thing entirely." He pointed at her pin. "That is the Special Warfare Operator insignia. The Budweiser. Only guys who finished the pipeline and served with a team wear that." He let the words sink in. "So, I'll ask you again. Class?" The room felt like it was closing in. Sarah could feel the sweat beading on her upper lip. People were starting to look their way, sensing the tension. She was trapped. Before she could dig herself into a deeper hole, David simply nodded, a look of profound disappointment crossing his face. "I thought so," he murmured. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just walked away, pulling out his phone. 20 minutes later, Sarah was still shaking, trying to laugh off the encounter with Mac, who had missed the whole exchange. She was just about to make her escape when the door to the hall opened. A man in an impeccably pressed service uniform walked in. He was older, with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. He wore the stars of a brigadier general. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on David, who gave an almost imperceptible nod toward Sarah. Then the general walked directly toward her. The general stopped in front of her, his presence radiating a calm authority that silenced the entire room. Everyone felt it. The volunteers stopped mid-sentence. Mac dropped his donut. The general looked at Sarah, then at the pin on her vest, then back at her eyes. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice deep and resonant, "I'm General Morrison. May I ask where you served?" Sarah was frozen. The game was up. She knew it. Mac knew it. Everyone in the room was starting to suspect it. I was with a support unit." "Sir," she whispered. The general tilted his head, a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, crossing his features. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather case. He opened it to reveal his own trident, the gold dulled by years of wear and salt water. "This," he said, holding it up, "represents the men who taught me how to be a leader. It represents the men I buried. It represents a promise that I will never, ever dishonor their sacrifice by pretending to be something I am not." He looked at her pin. It was shiny, new, and wrong. "Only special forces carry that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed in the silent hall. "Only the men who swam in the freezing water at midnight, who carried their wounded brothers through the jungle, who looked the enemy in the eye. You are wearing the skin of a dead man, ma'am. You are wearing my skin." The tears started streaming down Sarah's face, hot and unstoppable. The general didn't yell. He didn't call the police. He simply reached out and, with a gentle motion, unclasped the pin from her vest. It came off with a soft snick that sounded like a gunshot. He closed his fist around it. "I'm going to dispose of this," he said. "And you are going to go home. And you are going to think about what it means to earn something." He turned to David, who was watching from the corner, and gave a slight nod. Then he walked out, leaving behind a vacuum of silence so complete that Sarah could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Sarah doesn't know how she got home that night. She remembers Mac's face, a mask of betrayal and disgust. She remembers the whispers that followed her to her car. She remembers the cat meowing for dinner when she finally collapsed on her kitchen floor, sobbing until she had nothing left. The days that followed were a blur of shame. She quit her job. She couldn't face the world. She deleted her social media accounts, the ones where she had posted vague, tough girl quotes about the warrior spirit. She stopped answering her phone. The weight of her lie, which had once been a shield, was now an anvil crushing her soul. She realized in the cold light of day what she had done. She had tried to steal a legacy. She had tried to buy respect with counterfeit currency. Weeks passed. The winter turned to a gray, slushy spring. One afternoon, there was a knock on her door. She almost didn't answer it, but a part of her, and the part that was tired of hiding, made her open it. It was David. He looked different, softer somehow. He held out a manila envelope. "I did some digging," he said. "Your dad, Army, right? 3rd Infantry, served in Iraq." Sarah nodded numbly. "How did you—" "The general," David said. "He has resources. We looked you up, found out about your dad, found out you never served, but we also found out why you're broken." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a photograph of a young man in desert camouflage, smiling. "That's my boy," David said, his voice thick. "Killed in 2007, IED. He pointed at the photo. "He was a PFC, just a kid. He wasn't a SEAL. He was a grunt. He was scared every single day. But he showed up. He did his job. He died doing his job." He looked at Sarah. "You don't have to be a SEAL to be worthy of respect. You just have to show up for your own life." He left the photo with her. Sarah stared at it for a long time. The next morning, she got dressed, went to the local community center, and signed up to volunteer. Not as a veteran, just as a person. She started helping with a program for homeless veterans, not by telling stories, but by sorting donations and filling out paperwork. She listened to their stories, the real ones, the painful ones, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to insert herself into them. She just listened. 6 months later, she received a small, plain box in the mail. Inside, on a bed of cotton, was a simple silver pin. It wasn't the trident. It was the outline of a soldier's silhouette with the words "Gold Star Family" etched underneath. There was a note attached, in handwriting she didn't recognize. On it read, "This was his mother's. She wanted you to have it. She said to tell you that we are all just trying to find a place to belong. You belong here with us if you want to. Just be yourself this time. D." Sarah pinned it to the inside of her jacket where no one could see it. And for the first time in her life, that was perfectly fine with her.